Actually, I'm still somewhat persistent around April 20th during our production in Beijing. I saw it once, and then regarding this car, I said at the time about many of its design aspects, including what kind of electric motor it uses, these kinds of things. Actually, I think Mazda back then might have been somewhat perfunctory toward Chinese consumers. Then, a couple days ago, after this car arrived at our design studio, I went again to thoroughly experience it statically. At that time, I also realized that actually regarding the exterior, when looking at the external aspects, there are indeed many elements that resemble what we call the LL03, we jokingly refer to as Chris. They still share some similarities. Then today, after the national holiday, I came over early in the morning, borrowed this car from their racing division store. Then we conducted a short term about 1 to 2 hour now regarding this car. I've already finished driving it. Regarding other aspects, like the exterior styling, similar designs, cabin space color scheme, all the tire specs, and other related elements. Next, we'll mainly discuss this car's dynamic driving aspects, some observations from my experience, subjective evaluations that strive to be as objective as possible. Alright, we've been driving for a while now, and then because the person sitting next to me, he recorded in the static review video, I mentioned at the design studio that this car, I was looking forward to its dynamic test drive to see how it truly performs. From which aspects of the dynamic test drive could I discern whether it's Mazda or Changan? It's from the steering system. The moment the steering moves okay, I immediately know it's Mazda or Changan. Alright, this car, I drove it out from the design studio. Have been driving until now for a while. First, I told the boss sitting next to me, I said, this steering system is indeed still Mazda. Because I've driven Mazdas, I've driven way too many. My familiarity with Mazda's steering systems is carved into my body, etched into my hands. That kind of muscle memory. So regarding this steering system, the moment I touched it, I could immediately sense this is still Mazda's signature feel. That distinct Mazda flavor, extremely unchanged, yes, extremely precise. This aspect is something Changan can never replicate. Or other domestic EV brands, they'll never be able to learn this previously. When driving some Mazdas and domestic models, I beg them, go acquire Mazdas or Porsches or BUM's steering systems, disassemble them, study how they're engineered, or invest heavily to poach some engineers. Have them beg to calibrate yours. That would work. Why? Because regarding steering systems, I believe if a steering system isn't well executed, well, then you shouldn't even drive that car. For people like us who care somewhat about driving feel, this steering system most directly reveals this car's handling characteristics. The term handling you hear constantly. What truly embodies handling is precisely the steering system in daily driving. If you enjoy driving and encounter steering that's poorly executed or inadequately calibrated, you wouldn't want to keep driving. Alright, steering system. We'll discuss this further ahead. When maintaining neutral position, the linearity of its torque feedback. I think if I had to nitpick, compared to Mazda's ICE vehicles, when centered, this linear torque sensation might not feel as mechanically connected, although both ICE and this use EP steering systems, both pure electric power steering, but Mazda steering systems have this characteristic. They can take your single electronic steering system and make it feel like the kind we use to experience what's called traditional hydraulic power steering or electro-hydraulic power steering. This is where Mazda's greatest strength lies. When centered, it might feel slightly. When making subtle adjustments, you would feel this torque might be a little bit light compared to a fuel car, a bit light compared to a fuel car's Mazda. But then once you look at it, the steering system is very obvious. It's a kind of torque, whether it's positive or when we're making a U-turn, a torque that returns to center. It can all be very linear, and then the precision of the entire steering system is just like we were on the overpass just now. For example, actually this road, I should have talked about it when I was talking about the chassis. You can see the reaction of the car's front from my lens. At a speed of 80, this steering system, even if you have a tiny adjustment of the steering wheel, well, the entire front of the car has a very quick response. This point is actually for Mazda owners. This is something we are very, very familiar with. A good steering system, it feels like an extension of your hand. Like it doesn't have any of that lag feeling. I look at the main steering system. This is a feeling that many domestic car brands can achieve. You go drive the current Sys 203 and then you go drive this car's steering system, you'll feel that the two steering systems are completely two different cars, completely different models. and then waiting for the red light ahead, let's talk about the brakes. And this brake, to be honest, because this car has curbs, so when I was driving this car, I was still thinking it has curbs, then its front-end kinetic energy recovery. Is it possible that it's also like most of our current domestic cars? The front end is very vague when you step on the brake. Maybe the front section is so long, maybe there's no automatic power feeling. Well, this brake, when it's in the front section, it's not that kind of feeling, go let their butts go where the feeling in the first half, it won't make you feel like it has. It has that feeling of kinetic energy recovery, that kind of automatic power. This point, I think, is they are immediately in. That is the integration of electricity and mechanics in this area. They have done a great job. When you drive this brake, you really won't feel that you are driving a brake with kinetic energy recovery generally. Many traditional kinetic energy recovery systems now, as long as it has kinetic energy recovery, then it will deliberately, or in the first half, they may cank that front-end kinetic energy recovery, that electronic recovery. The feeling of the brake is like it's very similar to a mechanical brake. They can't in the front section. It's all very vague. The front section is very empty when you step on it. For such a big half, it doesn't have much automatic power. The first half is all relying on this kinetic energy recovery. The feeling of the front speed, but this one, I think it's done very well, and this brake in the front section, when we drive daily, it's like you're just very relaxed in this process of bringing the wave. This brake is actually very comfortable. If there are now Mazda owners of fuel cars, you know Mazdas, whether it's a Tenza, whether it's Kixar 5, Kier 50, and also like the Mazda 3 Axela, these models, in the first half, its braking force, it actually comes a bit slower in the front section. The braking force it gives is not particularly much, and at the same time, Mazda's brakes, you feel that it doesn't give you much in the front section, then does it give you a lot in the back end. Actually, the brakes in the back end, it doesn't give you much either, so that's why before our own Mazda, I filmed a video for everyone about changing brake pads. That is, after changing the brake pads, that kind of insufficient braking force in the first half and the second half, that kind of effect, it was completely solved. It was completely gone. This car actually in the middle and rear section of the braking. For example, step on it, we have to move forward. Well, actually, it's braking in the middle and rear section. That is, to the end, you still feel a little bit that kind of insufficient braking force feeling. And then this car itself is also relatively heavy. But then its entire braking, the feeling of the automatic foot, actually the whole process, it's relatively linear, but then at the very end, for example, when we want to stop, you brake, and then you feel that it may not be according to my expected, that kind of speed reduction feeling. It's also possible that I've been driving German cars too much recently. It's a bit softer. It's a bit like the feeling of an old driver stepping on the brake and then releasing it a little at the end. Yes, it's a bit like that. Feeling its design purpose should also be to hope. It's just the feeling of motion sickness, okay? That's all I'll discuss about the brakes. Actually, overall speaking, I think these brakes still preserve that distinctive Mazda character from before. You'll understand once you test drive it. The third aspect is the chassis. Regarding the chassis, this is actually where the car gave me a rather pleasant surprise, because I've driven all previous Mazda models without exception. Previously, my impression of Mazda's chassis in this aspect, my most immediate impression was its firmness combined with abundant road feedback. When engineers were calibrating it during the calibration process, they intentionally provide enhanced road feel through suspension feedback. Regarding this characteristic, I genuinely believe many current Mazda owners can distinctly perceive this simultaneously while delivering substantial road feedback. Truthfully, regarding the chassis, specifically the suspension's vibration damping performance, the sensation it provides isn't particularly smooth, nor exceptionally solid. I sometimes feel Mazda's suspension gives you now, with this new model, the first noticeable difference is how this chassis performs on roads like this, or when we earlier tested it on that steering evaluation route. The overall chassis sensation now has resilience. This represents an extremely significant improvement. This resilient quality in the current chassis manifests as slightly more supple elasticity compared to previous suspensions. The transmission of physical sensations to the driver used to feel somewhat rigid. The entire vibration damping when encountering road seams produced abrupt clunk sensations with relatively pronounced movements. Now with this new chassis, when traversing road seams or encountering larger potholes and undulations, the road feedback it provides is actually a more cushioned transmission, a softer sensation. This aspect constitutes its most substantial improvement compared to previous fuel-powered Mazdas. This sensation is considerably more comfortable, eliminating the harsh transmission into the cabin. Moreover, the chassis' integral feel, solidity, and tautness are executed exceptionally well, vastly superior to their gasoline models. This aspect I urge you to experience personally, especially if you're a legacy Mazda owner. You'll particularly appreciate these chassis differences. I described alright when we entered the vehicle. The total mileage was around 120 something then. During this morning's test drive, we covered approximately 40 kilometers this distance with remaining battery at 11%, providing 47 km pure electric range. Since this vehicle hadn't been charged recently, therefore it's depleted. With depleted charge, we can't maintain this driving commentary format. Therefore, we'll now statically summarize other driving impressions. During our earlier dynamic driving, we discussed steering, brakes, and chassis. These three elements, as I mentioned, represent Mazda's core characteristics, even regarding chassis performance compared to gasoline Mazdas. Its comfort level has improved dramatically. These three aspects I recommend testing personally. Additionally, regarding the steering, there's one point I omitted: this steering system due to its excessive precision. Therefore, when using this system during highway driving, say sustained elevated road driving earlier on the elevated road at 80-90 km speeds while maintaining the steering system, requires constant micro adjustments due to its extreme precision. You see, even slight steering input causes the entire vehicle to deviate from its lane. There you go. This characteristic for an ultra-precise steering system, I believe, while being its strength, also creates a potential drawback for daily driving comfort. That aspect, then, what another thing is that steering feel I didn't mention just now, is that the feel of holding it is actually quite comfortable. Although this steering wheel looks like that what so-called holy basket, it's also two-spoke, but actually the whole thing, whether it's the grip or the entire steering system's handling performance, it's compared to long press. It's really two different things. They are two different things. And then tire pressure 3.3.1, 3.3.2. This tire pressure is very, very high. When talking about tire pressure, next we'll talk about the sound insulation of the tires and the sound insulation of the entire cabin. This part, the first, is inside the tires. This sound insulation, the measured value is only 340. A 340 Raymo index, so the sound insulation of this car's tires is actually quite good, but its grip, this part, its traction, is basically grade A, which means that this car's grip is not particularly good. It mainly focuses on sound insulation and quietness. Some things okay, and then the sound insulation of the entire cabin. Old Mazda car owners, you all know that actually whether it's the Atenza, the 1.6 Mazda I have, or the Axela, or the CX-5 CX-50, this model actually for fuel cars for Mazda sound insulation is not particularly good. But this car, to be honest, its sound insulation control really surprised me a bit. Actually, in our daily driving process, its overall sound insulation compared to fuel cars is much better controlled. Of course, I didn't measure its specific numbers for this car. I think in the city, when driving on elevated roads, its sound insulation should be able to be controlled at around 63 decibels, 64 decibels, like that. Of course, this is a number I'm giving you based on my experience, of course. In reality, because of time constraints today, because this car is indeed out of power, so there's no way to do some very, very in-depth, detailed tests. If you have some car owners who have picked up their cars, the power part, single motor, rear wheel drive, rear wheel, remounted is exactly the same as this one with 3. This motor, its horsepower is 258, the torque is 356 Nm. This parameter actually, according to our current standards, is the level of a 2-point high-power engine. And then the electric motor, this car's electric motor, when we were driving dynamically, because of time constraints, we didn't talk to you about its overall power performance, is actually strong at the start, weak at the end. It really is that electric cars, when it gets to the end, it has no power. This car, I also stepped on it on a closed road. I stepped on it to about 130 speed. I just wanted to test its mid-late acceleration ability. At 130, if you step on it further, its overall power performance is not good. It's really not good. It's a bit like deflated. It's a bit like a limp feeling. It's really not good. This is also currently a very, very big problem that most electric motors bring when we drive on the highway. It's just that they are in a mid to high speed acceleration range like this in terms of acceleration capability. It's generally weaker, of course. Today we're still in the car with only 2 people if you were fully loaded. If the back was fully loaded, when its total weight really reaches more than 2 tons, okay, then at high speed, for example, running at 130, if you go to 120, 130, for example, during the process of accelerating to overtake it might be a little bit weak, especially whether it's this Mazda or not, or other, whether it's Byte or various new energy electric vehicles on the market, if it's not a dual motor version. So I suggest that everyone should leave a little bit of a safety margin, a safety distance margin when driving on the highway, a safety distance margin when driving on the highway. Okay, when it's static, there's one more thing. We're talking about the entire seat, and the seats on fuel cars, don't look at them, their appearance is very ugly compared to, for example, this seat. Its appearance is not that good, but I can tell you very responsibly Mazda, whether it's Mazda's entire range of seats, it can withstand long periods of sitting. Of course, the front row, of course, the front driver's seat and the front passenger seat, if you're in the back row because of the angle or the space, you might feel uncomfortable sitting for a long time, but the front seats, whether it's the X4, whether it's the Mazda 3, its entire shape, you can see Mazda's seat shape, its entire middle part, it's a bit like a gem. The ergonomics of the entire seat are very well done, so when we're taking long trips, long distance driving, you won't feel that this seat will bring you a very strong lumbar fatigue. This is what Mazda has done, the ergonomics. This brings a very, very big advantage. This is done very well, but today this seat, to be honest, because it has more, including things like zero gravity, these kinds of modes, and it's the same, so I really haven't found one yet that fits my own driving seat because it needs to be adjusted. There are many angles to adjust, so when you're adjusting it, you still need to spend some time to find one that's more suitable for your own driving seat, okay, but the entire seat's leather, suede leather seats, suede, and plus this kind of leather, this kind of suede in winter is very comfortable. For example, in this weather now, it's colder outside, this seat, it won't feel like leather, that cold feeling, okay, this point is very, very comfortable, although I've also said before that in my videos I've also mentioned that this car, its design and its battery electronic control and the motor, these parts are all, for example, the battery is from Cattle and the motor is the same as the Sedan EZ6. It uses the exact same 258 horsepower motor, and including the back, its range extender. The range extender is also completely provided by Changan. The 1.5 ZHG engine, that range extender exactly the same, including the engine of the extended range version. Its power, including the drive motor, its power are basically the same at the time. I actually had a bit of a keyboard warrior idea. I said there's nothing to expect from this car. This car is probably just Mazda in China in order to cope with this carbon credit. This kind of situation, not enough, so they made this thing come over and be perfunctory for a bit. We Chinese consumers, if there's something to buy, it's better. If there's nothing to buy, okay, then some are discontinued after a year or two, and then delisted like that, it's okay for Mazda. But after experiencing this car today, I actually find I can still see that they put in some effort on this car. At least from its calibration and tuning, you can still see that it was indeed done by Mazda. This thing, you can feel it as soon as you drive it, that kind of feeling, okay, and after driving it, it also dispels our previous kind of keyboard warrior thoughts, which is to say, this is just a shell new land, the Sardo 3 kind of feeling. Actually, it's not. I hope you guys go drive it and feel it, okay, go feel this car. Okay, so today's video